Imagine being trapped in a YouTuber's twisted world of horrors. You think you're free, but what if escaping wasn't the end? Stay tuned to witness the shocking twist that will leave you questioning everything. What happens when you can't outrun your nightmares? Find out right now. The door creaked as it opened. A stale, musty air rushed in. The walls were covered in grime. A dim light flickered overhead. The boy stepped inside.
His heart raced.
The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Suddenly, a loud bang. He froze. The room was cold. So cold. Shadows danced on the walls. There was something off. A muffled voice came from behind a door. He walked slowly, almost afraid to breathe. The closer he got, the clearer the voice became. A YouTuber, the famous one. But something wasn't right. The walls had posters of strange faces. Laughter from a video looped in the background. It didn't match the silence that now hung in the air. He turned a corner. The room ahead was dark. Only a small light illuminated the floor. A cage. Inside, a figure moved. A face stared back at him.
The boy gasped.
It was lifeless. But somehow it was still alive. His legs shook, but he forced them to move. The voice grew louder. It was coming from the room. His hands trembled as he reached for the door. The handle was warm. Too warm. Like something had just been there. He yanked it open. A narrow, dark staircase led down. The air smelled of sweat, metal, and something sweet, but sour. He stepped down. Each creak of the stairs sent chills through him. The space below was tight, claustrophobic. He couldn't see the bottom. Suddenly, a loud crash from above. Footsteps.
Heavy. Steady.
Someone was coming. His body screamed to run, but his feet felt frozen. He heard a whisper, just a breath. Don't go down. It was the voice. The YouTuber's voice. But it didn't sound like it used to. It was strained, desperate. The boy shook his head. He couldn't turn back.
Not now.
His legs finally obeyed, moving faster.
Down. Deeper.
The sound of chains scraping against the floor echoed. The air grew thicker. He could barely breathe. His chest tightened. He reached the bottom. A room full of old monitors. They blinked, flashing images of him. In cages.
Trapped.
The boy looked around. Then he saw it. The trapdoor. It was small, but it was open. It was his way out. He sprinted. He was so close. The door slammed shut. Something was behind him. He turned just in time. A shadow.
Tall.
Looming. The YouTuber. The figure stepped forward. Its eyes gleamed in the dim light. The boy's heart thudded. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The YouTuber grinned, slow and cold. Thought you could escape? The boy's breath quickened. The room seemed to close in on him. It felt smaller. Suffocating. The shadows twisted, curling around him like fingers. A cold hand grabbed his wrist. The boy yanked it free. He darted towards the open trapdoor. But something pulled him back. A rope.
Thin. Strong.
It wrapped around his ankles. He was dragged back into the darkness. The boy screamed. But the YouTuber only laughed. The sound echoed in the suffocating silence. With one final effort, the boy kicked his legs, fighting the grip. His body slammed against the cold floor. A loud crack. The world spun. Then silence. The boy's vision blurred. He tried to focus. The walls around him were pulsating, like they were alive. He gasped for air. A harsh breath. A voice whispered. A voice he knew. The YouTuber. But this time it was soft. You're just like them. The boy's eyes widened. The YouTuber's face twisted. The boy tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He fell back to the floor. The rope still held him in place. His hands scraped against the floor, seeking anything to hold on to. A faint light flickered in the corner of his eye.
A door.
A way out? It was just a glimpse, then it was gone. He strained to look again. Nothing. The boy twisted, desperate. A sudden crash from above. Footsteps. Heavy again. Closer. Closer. He was trapped.
There was no way out now.
The door was locked. The shadows grew larger. The boy could feel them moving around him. Watching. Waiting. And the YouTuber's cold laugh filled the room once more. The shadows crept closer, their presence suffocating. The boy's chest tightened. He pulled at the ropes, his hands raw and bloodied. But it was no use. The YouTuber's figure loomed over him, casting an eerie, unnatural shadow. The air was thick,
Stale.
the smell of decay hung around them. The boy's breaths became shallow, desperate.
I
don't want to be here, he whispered. The YouTuber knelt beside him, his face inches from the boy's. You never had a choice, the YouTuber said, his voice cold, void of any warmth. The boy shivered. His eyes darted around the room, looking for any escape. Nothing. The walls seemed to pulse again, moving in slow, rhythmic waves. They were alive. Or at least they felt like it. The YouTuber's smile grew wider. His fingers brushed the boy's cheek, icy to the touch. The boy recoiled, but his body was weak. Helpless. You think you can run, the YouTuber hissed. You'll never escape. The boy's mind raced. A plan. There had to be one. His eyes flicked to the far corner of the room, where a faint light glimmered.
The door.
It was still slightly ajar.
Hope.
The boy fought harder, pushing against the ropes. He had to move. His body screamed in protest, but he forced his legs to shift. He kicked his feet, desperate to free himself. The YouTuber watched, amusement flickering in his eyes. The boy's fingers finally reached the rope, and with a sudden yank, he tore it loose. He gasped for air, his limbs aching. Without a second thought, he scrambled toward the door. His heart raced faster than ever. A roar of laughter echoed behind him. The YouTuber stood up, his voice growing louder. You'll never make it, he shouted. But the boy didn't stop. He burst through the door, his hands scraping against the cold metal frame. The room beyond was empty. No more monitors. No more shadows. Only a single narrow hallway. He ran down it, his feet pounding against the floor. It felt endless. But he didn't dare look back. Every corner he turned, every step, he could hear the YouTuber's voice. Close. Too close. The hallway seemed to stretch forever.
Then he saw it.
A window.
Light.
Sunlight. His hand reached for the handle. A voice behind him. A whisper. You're mine. The boy turned just in time. The YouTuber stood there, blocking the way. A twisted grin spread across his face. You thought you could escape? The boy's heart sank. It wasn't over. Not yet. The boy's hands trembled as he backed away. The YouTuber's grin never faltered, like he was savoring the moment. The door, the light, the window. They all felt so far away now. The hallway seemed to narrow with every step he took back. I gave you a chance, the YouTuber said, his voice eerily calm. But you won't leave. The boy's pulse raced. He glanced to his side, searching for something. Anything to defend himself. The walls, now covered in faint streaks of red, seemed to lean in closer. The boy's mind raced. There had to be a way out. He couldn't let this be the end. His eyes flicked to the window again. It was still there. The light. He had to get to it. Without warning, the boy lunged. He shoved past the YouTuber, his body crashing into the taller figure. The YouTuber staggered, momentarily caught off guard. That was enough. The boy's legs carried him forward, faster than he thought possible. He was almost there, almost to freedom. The door loomed ahead, its edge within reach. But the YouTuber wasn't far behind. You're not faster than me, the YouTuber growled. A hand shot out, grabbing the boy's shoulder and yanking him back. Pain shot through his spine. The boy grunted, struggling to break free. The YouTuber was stronger, relentless. The boy swung his arm back, desperate, and his hand collided with something hard. A metal rod. He grabbed it. A weapon. His pulse surged with the sudden rush of adrenaline. With all his strength, the boy swung the rod at the YouTuber's arm. The impact sent a sickening crack through the air. The YouTuber recoiled, clutching his arm in pain. This was his chance. The boy didn't hesitate. He pushed past the YouTuber, slamming his shoulder into the door. It gave way. The boy stumbled into the light, gasping for air, his chest heaving. He could see it now. Freedom. The outdoors. The world beyond. The YouTuber's voice followed him, faint but growing louder. You can't outrun me. But the boy didn't look back. He ran. And he didn't stop. His feet carried him faster, farther, away from the nightmare. His body ached, but he didn't care. He could feel the wind against his skin, the sun warming his face. He was free. Or so he thought. The boy didn't slow down. The world outside felt surreal, bright, alive. But as he sprinted through the open space, something tugged at the back of his mind. A feeling. It wasn't over. His breath came in shallow gasps, his legs burning, but he couldn't stop. The YouTuber's words echoed in his head. You can't outrun me. The boy glanced over his shoulder. There was nothing. Nothing but the empty field behind him. He slowed, cautiously. A drop of sweat trickled down his forehead, his heartbeat thudding in his chest. Maybe he really was free. But then, a sharp sound, like a crack of thunder, and the ground beneath him trembled. His legs buckled, and he fell to his knees. His breath caught in his throat.
No.
Not again. The ground split open. A dark, gaping hole appeared where solid earth had once been. It swallowed the light, pulling everything into its depths. The boy scrambled back, eyes wide in terror. From the hole, something began to emerge. A figure.
Tall.
Too tall. The YouTuber. He climbed out, his skin pale and warped, his eyes wide with madness. You thought you could escape, he rasped, his voice distorted, broken. But you're just a part of the show. The boy's stomach turned. The YouTuber was no longer the man he once knew. He was something else, something worse. His body flickered in and out of focus, like a glitch in reality. I've been waiting for this moment, the YouTuber hissed, his voice like static. The boy stumbled backward, his mind racing. How was this possible? He was outside. He was free. But the world around him wasn't real. A sick realization hit him. He wasn't in the real world anymore. This was another stage. Another trap. The YouTuber grinned, his teeth sharp and jagged. You thought you could leave the show? There's no escape. The boy's heart pounded as he turned, ready to run again. But the sky above was no longer blue. It had darkened, swirling with clouds. The earth beneath his feet shifted, warping into something unrecognizable. He was trapped once more. In this nightmare. For good. The boy's breath came in ragged gasps, his chest tight with fear. The world around him twisted, the ground beneath him pulsating like a heartbeat. The YouTuber stepped forward, his distorted figure growing larger, looming over him. The boy stumbled back, the air thick and suffocating. He couldn't escape. Not anymore. The YouTuber's grin widened, impossibly wide, stretching beyond what a human face should be able to do. You thought you were clever, didn't you? The YouTuber's voice crackled, vibrating through the air. The boy's legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stand. His eyes darted around, searching for anything, any way out. But there was nothing. Only darkness closing in. The world was no longer real. It was a nightmare. A stage. A trap. The boy swallowed, trying to steady his breathing. Please, he whispered, his voice shaky. Let me go. The YouTuber's laugh echoed through the twisted landscape. Go? Oh no, my friend. You're going. You're going to stay right here with me. Forever. The boy's stomach churned. The YouTuber raised a hand, his fingers elongated and twisted like claws. You are just a pawn, he muttered, his voice growing darker. A part of the show. But now you're part of me. The boy felt something cold brush his skin. A sensation like ice creeping down his spine. His body froze. He couldn't move.
Couldn't breathe.
The world tilted, shifting like a disorienting spin. The boy's vision blurred. And suddenly, everything was silent. The YouTuber's face blurred out of focus, becoming a twisted mask of motion. The boy fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the crushing weight of the unreal world pressing in. The YouTuber's voice, faint yet clear, whispered in his ear. "You're mine now. Forever." The boy closed his eyes, feeling the last threads of reality slipping away. His mind screamed to escape. But there was no escape.
Not this time.
The world around him collapsed, folding in on itself. And then silence.
Darkness. Complete. Total.
And in that stillness, the boy was lost. In the pitch-black void, the boy's mind swirled. He was floating. Or falling. He couldn't tell. No light. No sound. Just endless, suffocating darkness. His thoughts felt distant, like echoes in a cavern, growing softer, fading away. But then, a flicker. A small spark of light. It was dim, far off, but it pulsed, almost as if calling him. The boy's eyes strained, trying to focus. He could feel himself being pulled toward it. A desperate need to reach it. The ground, if it could even be called that, beneath him shifted again. The darkness around him twisted, swirling, but the light, it remained. A voice. Not the YouTuber's. It was softer.
Faint.
But it was there. "Run, run." It whispered, barely audible. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. The boy's body jerked, the weight of the oppressive dark lifting, just for a moment. He forced his legs to move. Step by step. He moved toward the light, ignoring the stillness trying to pull him back. The deeper he went, the clearer the light became. It wasn't just a light. It was an opening. A crack. A fracture. The boy reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the light. And suddenly, the world around him began to shift violently. The darkness screamed. The air twisted with noise, like static from a broken television. The boy gasped, stumbling forward. The light stretched wider, pulling him in. His heart raced faster, his breath ragged. For a split second, he thought he saw the YouTuber's face flicker in the distance, grinning, teeth sharp and endless. But the boy didn't stop. He couldn't. The light surged, engulfing him. And then, a violent rush. A sensation of being pulled, torn, ripped. Then nothing. The boy's eyes blinked open. The light was gone. But this wasn't the same world. The air was cool.
Fresh. Clean.
The ground beneath him solid, real.
He was outside.
Free. The boy took a cautious step forward, his heart still racing. Everything looked familiar. But not quite right. He looked around. A street. A house. His house. The boy's pulse quickened. This was home. But the moment he looked closer, he froze. It was different. Not quite as he remembered. The door to his house was wide open, the windows dark and empty. A chill ran through him. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw something. A shadow. It was watching him. Looming. Waiting. The boy's heart pounded in his chest, each beat like a drum echoing in his ears. The shadow moved.
Slow.
Purposeful. It was tall, too tall, and its shape was twisted, as if it didn't quite belong. The boy froze, his breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. He turned slowly, his body trembling as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He was outside. He had escaped. But then why did it feel like he never left? The shadow stretched, growing longer, darker, as it slid toward him. The boy's eyes darted to the house again. The door was still open. The emptiness inside seemed to call out to him. But the shadow was closer now. Closer with each passing second. The boy's legs refused to move, his body paralyzed by fear. The shadow stopped just a few feet away from him. He could hear a faint, unnatural hum vibrating from it. A presence. The air felt heavy, oppressive. The boy took a step back, but his feet felt stuck, weighted down. A voice, familiar yet distorted, echoed in his head. "You can't escape." The boy's breath hitched. It was the YouTuber's voice, but it sounded wrong. The boy blinked, and the shadow shifted again, moving closer with unnatural speed. It reached out, long, dark fingers stretched toward him. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. He bolted. His legs screamed in protest, but he ran as fast as he could, toward the open door. He didn't care what was inside. He didn't care if it was a trap. Anything was better than the shadow. The door slammed shut behind him as he stumbled inside. He gasped for air, his heart pounding in his chest. The house was silent, empty, but the darkness seemed to follow him inside. He turned, his back against the door. The boy's eyes scanned the room, his breath heavy, as if the very air was thick with dread. And then he saw it, the familiar figure standing at the far end of the room. The YouTuber. But this time, it wasn't just his face. It was all of him. The figure was no longer human. It was a twisted, monstrous version of what he remembered. The boy's mouth went dry. The YouTuber's grin stretched impossibly wide. "You really thought you could leave?" the distorted voice whispered, cold and mocking. The boy stumbled backward. The room around him warped. The walls shifted like liquid, bending and folding. He was back in the nightmare. And there was no escape. Not this time. The YouTuber's laugh echoed through the room, growing louder, louder, until it swallowed everything. The boy's eyes widened in terror as the YouTuber's monstrous form took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath its weight. The room seemed to distort, stretching out like a funhouse mirror, the corners bending and warping as if reality itself were unraveling. The boy's heart raced. Sweat trickled down his forehead. His limbs felt heavy, like the very air in the room was holding him down. "You thought you were free," the YouTuber's voice crooned, no longer even attempting to sound human. It was a guttural, hollow tone, like something dragged from the depths of a nightmare. "But this place, it's all I have. And now you're mine." The boy backed away slowly, his gaze darting around the room, searching desperately for any means of escape. But the walls seemed to close in, narrowing until the space around him felt suffocating. "You're not going anywhere," the YouTuber said. "You'll never leave this place again." The boy's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't take his eyes off the twisted figure. The YouTuber's smile stretched further, impossibly wide, showing rows of jagged, uneven teeth. It was no longer even a person. It was something else entirely, something born from madness and fear. With a sudden, violent lurch, the boy turned and bolted for the door. His pulse throbbed in his temples as his feet pounded against the floor. The door was just ahead, he could make it. But as he reached for the handle, a sharp, icy grip closed around his wrist. He spun, gasping, and found the YouTuber standing right behind him, its face contorted into something grotesque and horrifying. "You're too late," the YouTuber hissed, the words dripping with malice. "You never left. You never will." The boy's world spun. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against him from all sides. The light flickered and died, leaving him in total darkness, and in that moment, he realized the terrible truth. The house. The nightmare. It was all one. The door swung open, but there was nothing beyond it. Just endless blackness. And then the boy understood. He was trapped. Forever. In the YouTuber's world. The darkness swallowed him whole, and with one final scream, the boy was gone. And the house stood still, waiting for its next victim. The house sat silent once more, its walls unmoving, its doors closed. The air was still, heavy with an eerie, unnatural calm. Inside, there was no sound, no movement, Nothing but the quiet, oppressive weight of the darkness. And then, the faintest glimmer of light appeared, soft, like a whisper against the black. A small, flickering glow in the corner of the room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to break the silence. The YouTuber, or whatever it had become, stood motionless, its grotesque smile fixed in place, its eyes empty yet gleaming with some strange satisfaction. It was no longer a person. It was something more, something other. But the light, it flickered again, brighter this time. A figure emerged from the shadows.
It was a boy.
His face pale and worn, his clothes torn, but his eyes, they were different. Harder, resolute. He stepped forward, moving toward the YouTuber with slow, purposeful steps. His heart pounded in his chest, but this time it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was something stronger, something born of anger and defiance. "I thought I could escape," he whispered, his voice low but clear. "But I never did. Not really." The YouTuber's smile twitched, its form rippling like a broken reflection. "You can never escape me," it hissed, its voice a warped echo. The boy stopped in front of it, his eyes locked with the twisted figure. But something had changed. The boy had changed. With one final, steady breath, he took a step forward, closer than before. And with a single, sharp movement, he reached out and touched the YouTuber's chest. The darkness shuddered. For a moment, everything went still. The boy felt the pull of the house, the trap closing in around him, but this time, he didn't resist. He embraced it. The house had no hold over him now. And as the YouTuber's figure flickered one last time, it began to collapse into itself. The shadows bled away, dissolving like smoke in the air. The boy stood alone in the quiet room, the light now shining brightly around him. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he was free. The nightmare was over. And the house was gone.